Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rehab Podcast Weekly. Today, we're diving into the topics: the knee, anatomy, and biomechanics.
Okay, think about your knee for just a second. It seems pretty simple, right? Just a hinge. Bend, straighten.
Yeah, that's how most people picture it.
But when you actually look closer, it's this incredible piece of biological engineering, super intricate. And that's what we're really getting into today on the deep dive.
Exactly. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, anatomical charts, biomechanics research, injury stuff too.
And our goal, our mission today, is to really unpack the knee, how it moves, what keeps it stable, and maybe touch on some common problems people run into.
Yep. We want to understand its anatomy, its biomechanics, but, keep it clear, keep it engaging for you listening, not get too bogged down in the jargon.
Sounds good. So let's kick things off with the basics, the bones.
Right, so three main players here. You've got the femur, that's your thigh bone, then the tibia, which is the main shin bone, the bigger one, and the fibula, the sort of center bone running alongside the tibia.
Okay, femur, tibia, fibula.
Yep. And you can see those rounded ends on the femur? Those are the condyles, medial on the inside, lateral on the outside.
In that groove at the front.
That's the trochlea. Really important for the kneecap, which we'll get to.
Okay, but between the femur and tibia, there's something else, isn't there, to stop them grinding together?
Absolutely crucial. The menisci, these are like wedge-shaped bits of cartilage. They sit right between the femoral condyles and the top flat part of the tibia, the tibial plateau.
Like little shock absorbers.
Exactly that. And stabilizers, too. They prevent direct bone-on-bone contact, and get this, they cover about 60% of that contact surface and handle over half the load going through the joint.
Over half. Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge for such small structures.
It really is. And it's not fixed either. As one of our sources, the knee meniscus, points out, those numbers, the percentage of contact and load, they actually change quite a bit. Depends on how bent your knee is and, how healthy the meniscus tissue is.
Right, okay. So bones for structure, menisci for cushioning.
Yeah.
What about the kneecap, the patella? Where does that fit in?
The patella. That's the heart of the patellofemoral joint. It's connected above to your big thigh muscle, the quadriceps, through the quadriceps tendon.
Okay.
And then below the patellar tendon connects it down to the tibia. So when your quad muscle contracts, it pulls on the patellar.
And that makes it slide.
Yep, it slides up and down in that groove we mentioned earlier, the trochlea on the femur. That sliding motion is basically how you straighten and bend your leg.
Okay, so wait. If it's sliding, the actual area where the patella touches the groove, that must be changing all the time, right? As you move?
Precisely. It's a dynamic contact area.
Yeah.
And the shape of that trochlear groove is absolutely critical for keeping the patella stable while it does that sliding.
What happens if the groove isn't, deep enough?
That's a condition called dysplasia. If the groove is too shallow, the patella can become unstable. It might pop out of place, dislocate much more easily.
Ouch. Is there anything they can do for that?
Well, one source mentions a surgery called trochleoplasty, basically deepening the groove, but it also notes it's not super common yet. Still being refined, I suppose.
So it's not just the bone shape keeping the patella on track then?
No, definitely not. The trochlea provides the main bony stability of that channel. But you've also got ligaments, those strong connective tissue bands, and something called the retinacula, which are like fibrous sleeves holding things in place. Plus, the muscles around the knee play a big role.
Any specific ligaments that are key for the patella?
Yes, the medial patellofemoral ligament, the MPFL, is on the inside edge of the knee, really crucial for preventing the patella from sliding sideways, laterally. In fact, damage to the MPFL is a very common reason for lateral patellar dislocations.
Makes sense, like a whole system of checks and balances.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I remember reading somewhere, one source mentioned the knee having 6 degrees of freedom. That sounds complicated, more than just bending.
It is, yeah. Much more than a simple hinge. Think about it. Bending and straightening is one thing, right? Flexion, extension. But the knee can also shift slightly forward and back, a little side to side, and even rotate slightly. Tiny movements, but they're there.
6 different ways it can move, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. 6 potential independent movements. And because of this complexity, things like the pressure between the patella and the femur, where they're actually touching, the forces in the muscles, all that stuff is constantly changing in quite complex ways whenever we move.
Okay, wow. 6 degrees of freedom.
Okay.
So ligaments are obviously vital for controlling all that potential motion. Let's talk more about the main ones holding the joint together side to side.
Right, the collateral ligaments, you have the medial collateral ligament, the MCL, on the inside of your knee,
Right.
and the lateral collateral ligament, the LCL, on the outside.
And they attach to the femur at different points.
Yep. There's a good figure. It shows them attaching to those bony bumps on the side of the femur near the knee, the epicondyles. Medial epicondyles for the MCL, lateral for the LCL.
And they don't just sit there passively, do they? Their tightness changes as you bend your knee.
Exactly. That's a key point. The MCL, or at least the main front part of it, stays relatively tight pretty much throughout the whole range of bending.
Okay, so it's always providing some support.
Right. But the LCL is different. It's tightest when your knee is fully straight. But as you bend your knee, especially past about 90 degrees, it actually slackens off quite noticeably.
Huh. So they have different jobs depending on the angle.
Precisely. This difference in behavior is really important for how the knee maintains stability through different positions. It's like different stabilizers kick in at different points in the movement.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, bones, patella, cushions, ligaments.
Hmm.
How does this all come together for the actual movement? When we bend our leg, what are those big femur condyles doing on the tibia?
Ugh. Knee kinematics. It's quite elegant, actually. The way those rounded femoral condyles move on the flat tibial plateau isn't simple rolling. It's a combination of rolling and sliding.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is that the two sides, the medial and lateral condyles, they don't move the same way. The medial one, on the inside, it acts more like a pivot point. It rolls, but it doesn't slide backward or forward very much. It's more constrained.
Almost like it's rotating in place.
Pretty much, yeah. But the lateral condyle, the one on the outside, that's a different story. As you bend your knee, it not only rolls, but it also slides backward quite significantly. We're talking about 15 millimeters or so.
15 millimeters, that's a fair amount of sliding on just one side.
It is. And this difference, this asymmetry in movement between the medial and lateral sides, it actually causes the femur to rotate externally relative to the tibia as you bend. Or you could think of it as the tibia rotating internally relative to the femur.
So there's a twist.
Yeah, a subtle twist happens as you bend, maybe around 30 degrees of rotation between roughly 10 and 120 degrees of flexion. It's often called the screw-home mechanism when you straighten the knee, but the reverse happens during bending. It's not just a simple hinge swing.
A hinge with a twist. Got it. Does that change when we put weight on it, like doing a squat?
The overall pattern of rolling and sliding is similar, yeah. But some research suggests that backward slide of the lateral condyle might happen a bit earlier in the movement during weight-bearing activities compared to just bending your leg freely in the air.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's the basic mechanics. What about everyday stuff, like just walking? How does the knee handle that?
Yeah, walking is a great example. Knee joint biomechanics and physiological conditions breaks down the walking gait cycle really well. You've got two main phases in each step.
Stance and swing.
Exactly. Stance phase is when your foot is on the ground, bearing weight. Swing phase is when your foot is off the ground, swinging forward for the next step.
And each of those phases has, like, subparts, right?
Correct. Stance gets broken down into initial contact, usually heel strike, then mid-stance, when your foot's flat, and terminal stance as your heel lifts off. Swing phase starts with initial swing as the toe leaves the ground and ends with terminal swing right before the heel hits the ground again.
And the knee's doing different things in each part.
Definitely. During stance, a huge role is shock absorption, cushioning the impact as you load the leg. Then during swing, it needs to bend enough flex to lift your foot so your toes don't drag, and then straighten out, extend to get ready for the next foot plant.
I can picture that. Bend to lift, straighten to land. Does walking faster change what the knee does?
Oh, absolutely. Speed makes a difference. As you walk faster, you generally see a bigger range of motion at the knee. You also tend to see a larger extension moment. That's the force trying to straighten the knee during stance, and the knee ends up absorbing more power.
Absorbing power, like braking.
Kind of, yeah. Especially during that initial loading part of the stance phase, it controls the descent of your body weight.
How much does it typically bend overall when walking?
For a normal walking pace, the total range of motion is usually somewhere between, say, 53 and 75 degrees.
Okay. And they also mentioned moments and power curves. What did those tell us?
Yeah, the moment curve shows the twisting forces. You see periods where the net force is trying to straighten the knee, extension moment, and periods where it's trying to bend it, flexion moment. The power curve shows energy flow. Is the knee generating power, like muscles pushing, or absorbing power, like controlling movement?
And what's the main story there?
Well, during stance, it's mostly absorbing power, doing that shock absorption job. And overall, if you look at the whole cycle, the knee absorbs significantly more energy than it generates during walking. Really highlights that shock absorber role.
It's amazing how much is going on just to take a step.
Oh.
Okay, let's circle back to those menisci. We said they're cushions, but one source really stressed their importance for long-term joint health, right? Preventing arthritis.
Absolutely critical. The knee meniscus source couldn't be clearer. They are vital for protecting the articular cartilage, that smooth surface on the bone ends, from breaking down. Lose your meniscus function and your risk of developing osteoarthritis goes way up.
Wow, so protecting them is key. Remind me about their shape again.
They're sort of C-shaped or crescent-shaped wedges of fibrocartilage. Figure 1 in that source shows them sitting nicely between the rounded femur condyles and the flat tibia top. They're not identical. The medial inner one is more C-shaped and less mobile, while the lateral outer one is more circular and can move a bit more.
And they spread the load.
Exactly. They increase the contact area between the femur and tibia significantly, which means the pressure on any one point of the articular cartilage is much lower. Distributes the stress.
Makes sense. So damaging them is obviously bad news. How do people typically tear their meniscus?
In younger people, it's often sports injuries. Twisting motions, especially when the foot is planted and the knee is bent, maybe a sudden change of direction or a heavy landing. That's prime territory for a tear.
And often happens with other injuries too.
Very often, yeah. The source mentions that meniscus tears happen alongside ACL tears in something like over 80% of ACL injuries. It's a common combination. People often feel a pop, sharp pain, then swelling, and maybe locking or catching later on.
I've heard about different zones, like red and white zones for tears. What's that about?
That's all about blood supply, which is critical for healing. The outer third of the meniscus has decent blood vessels. That's the red zone. Tears there have the best chance of healing, either on their own or if surgically repaired.
Because the blood brings healing stuff.
Exactly. Growth factors, cells, nutrients. The middle third has blood supply only on its outer edge, the red-white zone. Healing potential is iffy there, but the inner two-thirds, that's the white zone. It's a vascular, basically no direct blood supply.
So tears there don't heal well.
Unfortunately, no. They have very poor natural healing capacity. It's like trying to repair tissue in an area with no circulation.
So what do surgeons do for those inner tears then?
Often, the only option is a partial meniscectomy, trimming away the torn, unstable fragment. It can relieve symptoms like clicking and pain in the short term.
But there are downsides.
Yeah, the source points out the long-term risk. Removing meniscus tissue means you lose some of that vital cushioning and load distribution. This can increase stress on the articular cartilage and potentially speed up the development of osteoarthritis down the road.
So repair is better if possible.
Definitely the goal, especially for younger patients, to preserve the meniscus. That's why there's so much research trying to figure out how to get those white zone tears to heal.
Like what kind of research?
Things like trying to stimulate blood flow into the tear, using techniques like trephination, making small holes, or creating vascular access channels, using bits of the joint lining, the synovium, which has a good blood supply. And then there's regenerative medicine approaches using stem cells or growth factors to try and kickstart the repair process.
Are any of those standard treatments yet?
Not really universally accepted or proven consistently effective yet. Still mostly in the research or limited clinical use stage. It's a tough biological problem.
And does it differ for older people or kids?
Yeah, somewhat. In older adults, meniscus tears are often degenerative. They happen gradually from wear and tear over time, sometimes without a specific injury. In kids, especially isolated tears without ligament damage, surgical repair often works quite well, probably because their tissue just has better healing potential overall.
Okay. Given those healing challenges, especially in the white zone, the idea of actually making new meniscus tissue sounds pretty futuristic, but potentially revolutionary.
It really is. Tissue engineering is a super exciting area for meniscus problems. The basic idea, as the knee meniscus source describes, is to use cells, often combined with some kind of scaffold or framework, to grow new meniscus tissue in the lab that could then be implanted to replace or repair the damaged part.
Where do the cells come from? Can they use your own cells?
That's one option, autologous cells, taking cells from a healthy part of your meniscus or maybe even other tissues. Another option is allogeneic cells from a donor. And stem cells are a big focus too because they can potentially be guided to become meniscus cells.
And the scaffold, what does that do?
The scaffold is like a temporary structure. It provides the shape and support for the cells to attach to, grow within, and organize themselves into new tissue. Eventually, ideally, the scaffold degrades away, leaving just the regenerated meniscus.
What makes a good scaffold?
There are key criteria. It needs the right mechanical properties strong enough and resilient enough for the knee. It needs to be bioactive, encouraging cells to behave like meniscus cells and integrate with the surrounding tissue. And logistical factors matter too. Can it be easily made, sterilized, stored, and implanted by surgeons?
Sounds so complex.
Yeah.
Are there different types of scaffolds they're trying?
Oh, yeah, lots of approaches. Synthetic polymers, hydrogels, those are watery gel materials, scaffolds made from natural components like collagen or other extracellular matrix molecules. Even using decellularized tissue from donors taking meniscus tissue, removing the original cells, and using the remaining natural scaffold. And some groups are even trying scaffold-free techniques, trying to get cells to self-assemble.
Each with pros and cons, I imagine.
Definitely. The source has a table outlining some of them. It's a huge challenge to perfectly replicate the native meniscus.
Replicate in what way?
Well, you need the right mix of cell types, the right biochemical soup proteins, sugars, and crucially, the right mechanical properties. The meniscus isn't the same strength in all directions, it's anisotropic. Mimicking all of that in an engineered construct is the ultimate goal. Biomimicry.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Let's just quickly loop back to the kneecap, the patellofemoral joint. We talked stability, but pain there is really common too.
Right, extremely common. Patellofemoral pain syndrome is a frequent complaint. And instability, as we discussed, is also a major issue. And again, it comes back to that interplay between the trochlear groove shape and the ligaments, especially that medial patellofemoral ligament, the MPFL.
And if the MPFL is torn, sometimes they reconstruct it surgically.
Yes, exactly. MPFL reconstruction is done for recurrent patellar instability, and that patellofemoral anatomy source really highlights how critical it is to get the tension right on that reconstructed ligament graft during surgery. Too tight or too loose can cause problems.
This is tricky.
It is, and the source also notes we still need to understand more about how the knee mechanics change after MPFL injury and reconstruction to really prevent long-term issues like cartilage wear in that joint.
It really drives home how everything in the knee is connected, doesn't it? One problem can affect the whole system.
Precisely. And that leads to the final point from the knee joint biomechanics source. It briefly mentions how injuries like ACL tears or meniscus tears don't just cause pain, they actually change the way the knee moves during activities like walking or stairs.
How so?
Well, gives examples. People with these injuries might have a smaller range of motion, their knee angles during gait might be different, maybe the forces across the joint are increased or shifted. The key takeaway is that restoring and maintaining stable, consistent knee kinematics, that smooth, coordinated movement, is absolutely vital for good long-term knee health, especially if you're considering something major like a total knee replacement down the line.
So wrapping this all up, it's crystal clear the knee is so much more than just that simple hinge we started with. It's this incredibly complex dynamic system. Bones, ligaments, cartilage, muscles, all working together in this really intricate dance.
Yeah, a delicate balance.
And understanding that balance is just so crucial, isn't it? For appreciating normal function, but also for figuring out what goes wrong with injuries or diseases like arthritis.
Absolutely. And thinking about all this complexity, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, for you listening, what does this mean for how we approach exercise? Or rehab after an injury? Even how we design shoes or braces to protect our knees?
Yeah, good point. And looking ahead, what are the next big breakthroughs going to be in biomechanics and that tissue engineering work? Where will the deeper understanding and better treatments come from in the future? Definitely gives you something to chew on.
Edited by Min. Rehab. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next podcast.